They didn't mean to offend him. The question came out almost instinctively, half curiosity, half discomfort. A young voice, unsure if it was crossing a line. The kind of question people whisper, then regret. "Why so many tattoos, sir?" The room went quiet. Not because the question was loud, but because everyone suddenly realized who it had been asked to. Michael P. Murphy did not raise his voice. He didn't shift his posture. He didn't smile. He didn't look away either. He simply paused, long enough for silence to do what words never could. In that pause, something heavy settled in the air. Not fear, but gravity. What he said next would follow some of those men for the rest of their lives. Long before Michael Murphy became a symbol, long before his name was carved into memorials and spoken with reverence, he was just a boy growing up in New York. Not a myth, not a warrior, just a kid learning the difference between right and wrong, in quiet, ordinary ways. He was raised in a household where responsibility wasn't optional and character wasn't negotiable, where promises mattered even when no one was watching. That foundation matters, because nothing that came later happened by chance. People love to believe that heroes are forged in a single moment, a battlefield decision, a final stand, an act of courage under fire. But that's comforting fiction. The truth is harder and less romantic. Men like Michael Murphy were already decided long before the chaos arrived. The battlefield doesn't create character, it reveals it. He didn't join the Navy to be admired. He didn't become a Sea all for tattoos, prestige, or legacy. He chose the hardest possible path for reasons most people never articulate, because they're uncomfortable confronting them. Responsibility, service, and the willingness to carry weight that others can't, or won't. SEAL training strips men down to something raw, not just physically, but psychologically. It removes comfort, certainty, and ego. It exposes how people behave when exhaustion silences pride. Many quit, some fail, a few adapt. The ones who endure do not come out unchanged. They come out quieter, more precise, less interested in being seen. Michael Murphy was one of those men. By the time he earned his trident, he had already learned lessons most people spend lifetimes avoiding. That pain can be endured without complaint. That leadership is lonely by design. That your decisions will cost others, and someday, they may cost you. And then there were the tattoos. To an outsider, tattoos are decoration, rebellion, or expression. In military spaces, they become something else entirely. Silent records, markers of memory, commitments carved into skin when words are insufficient. In elite units, tattoos are rarely random. They are promises you make when emotion demands permanence. Each one came from a chapter. Each one came from loss, loyalty, or lived experience that refused to fade quietly. These were not symbols for others to admire. They were reminders for himself, placed where he couldn't ignore them. That's what people misunderstand when they ask questions like that. When Michael Murphy deployed, he didn't see war as adventure. He understood it as responsibility in its most extreme form. His role wasn't simply to fight, it was to lead. And leadership, especially in combat, is not about control. It's about accountability for outcomes you cannot fully manage. Operation Red Wings would later become one of the most studied missions in modern military history. But before it had a name, before it had analysis and aftermath, it was just another task that demanded preparation, judgment, and trust. Murphy led a 4-man SEAL reconnaissance team into the mountains of Afghanistan with a clear objective and limited support. The terrain was hostile. The margins were thin. The risk was understood. What people don't often talk about is the psychological weight leaders carry in moments like this. The weight of foresight, knowing that every choice narrows outcomes, knowing that the line between survival and catastrophe is rarely dramatic. It's usually quiet and ordinary. When the team was compromised, the moment wasn't cinematic. It was fast, confusing, and irreversible. Murphy had seconds to decide, and those seconds were paid for by every value he had ever lived by. He chose duty over safety, communication over concealment, responsibility over self. Under heavy fire, wounded, exposed, and fully aware of the outcome, he moved into the open to call for help for his team. Not because he believed he would survive, but because leadership demanded it. That is where the myth usually begins. But the story doesn't end there. Because what came after, the silence, the recovery, the analysis carries its own truth. Murphy was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. His actions were recognized at the highest level. His name entered history. Yet the men who asked that question about tattoos weren't thinking about medals. They were thinking about the cost. So when Michael Murphy answered them calmly, directly, his words didn't glorify violence. They didn't romanticize sacrifice. Instead, they reframed the entire room's understanding of what those markings meant. He explained that every tattoo represented something he never wanted to forget. Men he served with, commitments he made, responsibilities he carried. They were not stories he told, they were reminders he lived with. The answer silenced everyone, because it forced them to confront something uncomfortable. That real service leaves marks you don't wear for attention. And real leadership is paid for long before the final moment arrives. Silence followed, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone understood instantly that they had just glimpsed the weight beneath the surface. And that weight never truly leaves. What most people never realize is that courage is rarely, it does not announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses. Real courage unfolds quietly, often internally, long before anyone else is aware a decision has been made. Michael Murphy understood this at a level that unsettled people who mistook confidence for volume. Leadership, in his world, was not charisma. It was containment, the ability to carry fear without letting it leak into those who depended on you. The ability to think clearly while your body is under threat, and your mind is calculating consequences faster than language allows. This is why the tattoos mattered. They were anchors. In environments where chaos strips identity to its core, human beings search for something fixed. For seals. That fixed point is not comfort or belief in survival. It is commitment. The memory of who you decided to be when conditions were calm, before stress attempted to renegotiate your value. Michael Murphy didn't see leadership as privilege. He saw it as exposure. Leaders are the first to accept blame, and the last to step away. And unlike in civilian life, mistakes in combat don't lead to embarrassment or career setbacks. They lead to absence, empty beds, names spoken in the past tense. That reality changes how a man carries himself. Those under Murphy's command described him as quietly demanding, not rigid, not theatrical. He didn't need to dominate a room. He imposed standards instead. Standards that were consistent even when inconvenient, especially when inconvenient. Psychologically, this type of leadership creates something rare. Trust that does not depend on personality, only on reliability. In higher-risk units, that trait is often more valuable than brilliance, because brilliance fractures under pressure. Reliability holds. The mountains of Afghanistan did not care about medals or mythology. They punished hesitation. They punished overconfidence. They punished miscalculations without apology. Every movement, every sound, every shadow had weight. Murphy knew that if things went wrong, they would go wrong quickly, and there would be no heroic framing in the moment. The violence that followed was not cinematic. It was disorienting, brutal, and fast. Rounds cut through trees. The terrain worked against them. Visibility evaporated. In those seconds, the brain does not think in sentences. It acts on patterns formed years earlier. Training compresses into instinct, and instinct reveals what matters most. Murphy's decision to expose himself was not spontaneous bravery. It was alignment. Alignment between who he had been, who he believed himself to be, and what the moment demanded. That type of alignment removes internal conflict, even if it guarantees personal loss. This is something few people understand. Fear does not disappear in moments like that. It is overridden, not by adrenaline, but by obligation. When Murphy made the radio call, he did so knowing it would likely be his last action. That knowledge did not dramatize the moment. It simplified it. When mortality becomes certain, hesitation loses its purpose. The choice becomes clean. Afterward, the story became larger than the man. Awards, headlines, analysis, ceremonies. But the psychological aftermath lives elsewhere, in the men who survived, in the families who inherited absence, and in the silence that settles after the noise stops. This is where myths dissolve and reality presses in. Because survival carries its own weight, guilt has no formal rank. but it outranks everything. The tattoos, again, come back into focus. They are not about what was survived. They are about what was witnessed. They remind the bearer that memory is not optional, that some experiences demand to be carried forward, even when they hurt. When people asked why he had so many, what they were really asking, whether they knew it or not, was how a person carries that much history without breaking. The answer is not resilience. It's structure. Murphy structured meaning into his body because memory fades, and rationale erodes under pressure. Skin does not. Symbols endure when emotion fluctuates. In that sense, the tattoos were less about identity and more about discipline. There is a psychological truth hidden here. Humans need physical reminders to honor invisible burden. Without them, we minimize, we forget, we dilute responsibility over time. Murphy refused to let that happen. Those who served near him understood that his calm wasn't passive. It was controlled intensity. The absence of panic was not natural. It was trained. The quiet was not emptiness. It was focus. And that quiet followed him everywhere. Even before the end, even before Red Wings, there was an understanding among those who knew him well. Michael Murphy did not need recognition. He was not avoiding death. He was accepting reality with clarity. Most people spend their lives resisting. This is why his answer to that simple question carried so much weight, because it made everyone in the room aware of something they were not ready to confront. That service is not something you perform. It's something you internalize. And once internalized, it changes how you move through the world. Silence followed because silence was appropriate, not admiration, not applause. Silence, the kind that acknowledges depth without attempting to comfort itself. What happens after the noise stops is what most people never prepare for. The world remembers moments. Survivors remember corridors of time where sound no longer exists, where the body moves forward but the mind remains suspended in what could not be changed. The aftermath of combat does not arrive with explosions. It arrives quietly, through absence, through names no longer answered, through habits that no longer make sense. This is where the cost of leadership becomes permanent. For those who served alongside Michael Murphy, survival was not relief. It was responsibility intensified. To live on meant carrying not just memory, but comparison. The unspoken question of why one life continued while another did not. That question never offers a satisfying answer. Psychologically, survivor's guilt does not behave like grief. Grief moves toward acceptance. Guilt resists it. It loops. It rewrites scenes endlessly, searching for alternative outcomes that reality has already closed. Murphy understood this long before his final mission. He understood that leadership creates invisible obligations that extend beyond the event itself, that your actions imprint onto others in ways you may never witness, that the example you set doesn't end when you're gone. It intensifies. This is an uncomfortable truth. The dead often leave fewer questions than the living. The living look backward relentlessly. They interrogate decisions with information that didn't exist in the moment. They apply hindsight to situations where speed was the price of survival. That tension becomes a lifelong companion. Murphy's tattoos, again, take on deeper meaning. They were not aesthetic statements. They were psychological anchors, reminders carved into the body to prevent the mind from rewriting reality out of pain. Reminders that choices were made with the best information available. That responsibility was embraced consciously. That matters, because memory is not neutral. Under emotional weight, it exaggerates alternatives. It amplifies regret. Structure counters distortion. For SEALs, structure is survival. Training is structure. Ritual is structure. Symbols are structure. Tattoos fall into that category, not vanity, but stabilization. Michael Murphy lived with that understanding. He knew that if meaning is not deliberately assigned, suffering becomes random. And random suffering is what breaks people. His legacy, often reduced to medals and memorials, is actually more subtle and more powerful. It exists in the standards he normalized, in the quiet expectation that duty continues even when outcome is uncertain, in the normalization of responsibility rather than heroics. The men who watched him lead didn't describe him as fearless. They described him as deliberate. That distinction is critical. Fearlessness is reckless. Deliberation is moral. Murphy's final decision was not about being remembered. It was about alignment between obligation and action. That alignment removes psychological fracture. Even in death, it prevents regret, because regret requires conflict. This is difficult to accept for those left behind, because it suggests that the person lost was at peace with a decision that others must now carry without the same clarity. That imbalance is cruel, but it is real. When stories like his enter public consciousness, they often get reshaped into inspiration, motivation, narratives of triumph. But for those who understand the internal mechanics of such moments, inspiration isn't the point. Recognition isn't the point. Accuracy is accuracy about cost, accuracy about consequence, accuracy about the psychological realities of leadership. Under threat, Murphy never framed sacrifice as noble suffering. He framed it as responsibility fulfilled. That framing removes romanticism, but preserves dignity. And dignity matters because it is the only thing that makes loss survivable. Those who asked him about the tattoos weren't ready for that depth. Most people aren't. Society prefers symbols without substance, acts without aftermath, stories without silence. His answer disrupted that preference. It forced everyone listening to confront the fact that behind every visible mark is an invisible calculation. That behind every quiet leader is a structure holding chaos at bay. And that behind silence is not emptiness, but weight. Weight that doesn't demand admiration, only understanding. In the end, what people remember is rarely what mattered most. They remember the question, the tattoos, the final moment, the headline, the medal. They attach memory to visible things because visibility is comfortable. It allows distance. It allows admiration without responsibility. What they don't see, and what Michael Murphy understood deeply, is that the real weight of service is never visible. At first glance, it lives in pauses, in restraint, in decisions made when escape was possible. But alignment mattered more. His answer silenced the room, not because it was poetic or dramatic, but because it removed illusion. It exposed something raw, that every mark on his body represented something he refused to forget, and something he accepted he would carry alone. Silence followed because no response was appropriate. There was no follow-up question that wouldn't trivialize what had just been revealed. No joke that wouldn't collapse under the gravity of it. The only honest reaction was stillness, the kind that forces inward reflection instead of outward performance. Michael Murphy did not ask to be understood. He did not seek recognition for restraint, leadership, or sacrifice. He lived in a way that assumed misunderstanding was inevitable and irrelevant. That is the quiet strength most people miss. In a world obsessed with expression, he chose containment. In a culture that rewards noise, he trusted silence. He understood that true commitment does not advertise itself, it endures. The tattoos were never about individuality. They were about memory discipline, about honoring bonds that words would eventually cheapen, about ensuring that time could not erode responsibility through comfort or distance. Even now, long after his voice is gone, that discipline remains. Not in stone, not in metal, but in the psychological echo left behind in those who witnessed what real leadership looks like under threat. Leadership that does not negotiate with fear. Responsibility that does not ask for approval. Silence that does not need explanation. When people ask why men like Michael Murphy leave such a deep imprint, the answer is uncomfortable, because it demands something. In return, not admiration, but honesty. Not praise, but reflection. Because stories like his raise a question few want to answer. If character is revealed under pressure, who would we be? When escape was possible, but responsibility wasn't. Michael Murphy answered that question without speaking, loudly, without spectacle, without needing witnesses. And when the room fell silent, it was not because his words were finished. It was because everyone realized theirs were no longer enough. The silence remained, and that silence was earned.